A little background on the text, kind of before I jump into the juice of it all. So last week we heard a story about Jesus learning about the death of his cousin, John the Baptist. And he was very distraught by that news, and he really wanted to go away by himself to pray, except the crowds were following him because he had been healing and he had been preaching and teaching, so he couldn't get that time away. And again, the crowds were so great, and he had talked to them and healed with them so long, they became hungry, and the disciples heard them grumbling and said, hey, we better send these people away. They're getting hangry. And Jesus said, don't send them away, you feed them. The miracle of the disciples feeding all of the people, the hearts being changed of the disciples. And then now we have Jesus sending the crowds away, and he finally gets some time by himself. So he goes up the mountain after sending the disciples in a boat so they cannot follow him, put him in a boat, send him out into the sea, and he goes and prays. Now the boat had been caught by the wind, and so it wasn't really going anywhere, being rocked a bit back and forth. And Jesus, instead of getting in his own boat and crossing the sea or walking the long way around, he decided to just take a shortcut and just walk on the water to get to the boat. Now this seems a bit of a miracle. Jesus, a person and the Son of God, walking on this water. However, God is a God of miracles. And walking on water may or may not be that surprising to us who know the story. I mean, this was a God who just fed 5,000 people, a God who heals, a God who teaches love and compassion. So the miracle, perhaps in this story, is Peter getting out of the boat. Because the boat, it might be rocked by the waves, but it's still safe. It's not the water, right? The water, you're probably not going to make it. The boat, you're safe. But Peter and the disciples see Jesus walking toward them, thinking first he's a ghost, which is a little freaky, and then realizing, wait, we know that guy. And then Peter, challenging God, says, all right, Jesus, if it's really you, then command me to come on the water and walk to you. And Jesus says, fine, do it, bring it. So Peter gets out of the boat, out of the safety, and he has his eyes on Jesus. He has his eyes on God. He has his eyes on love. He has his eyes on peace. He has his eyes on justice. And then the wind starts to blow a little bit, and he takes his eyes off of that. He no longer has that peace. He no longer has the comfort. He sees the treacherous waves around him, and he starts to sink. And in his sinking, he says, Lord, save me. And immediately what happens? He is lifted up by the Lord, who then says to him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? Well, of course he doubted. I mean, wouldn't you, if you were walking on the water and all of a sudden you saw the waves? I'd be a little scared. It is a little scary getting out of the water. And really, getting out of the water is something that we're called to do. We're not necessarily boat people. We're in the water people. And it's been an interesting week here in America. Actually, it's been an interesting few months. And I don't hesitate to preach on what happens in our country because, really, if I preach the gospel, we're just preaching peace, love, and justice. But something happened this weekend in Charlottesville that was just abhorrent. And I'd like to think that there were a lot of people who decided to come together and get out of the boat. So this weekend there was a rally that was so when you have a rally, you have to go through the channels of government and get your permission. So there was this rally, the people who were permitted to protest against the removal of a Confederate statue in Charlottesville. And then there was the night before, so Friday night, there was a group of pastors and lay leaders, church leaders, who decided to have a prayer vigil the night before. And they gathered in a church, and they prayed, and that's all they expected to happen. And then there were people who decided that rather than start the next day, they'd start the night before with torches. And they came and they surrounded the church, the front doors of the church, where these people were praying. And there were a few people there that I knew, a few friends of ours. The Bishop of Maryland, Delaware Synod, was there. And all of these things kind of blew up on my Facebook feed. I didn't really know what was happening kind of until that was coming in. And I was getting all these stories and all these things. And then I was thinking about this sermon today, and I was thinking about how these people were basically, the people in the church that were praying, they were getting ready to get out of the boat. They were getting ready to confront something that was going to be outside of their comfort zone. They were getting ready to stare peace in the face, to stare at justice, and to stare at Jesus. And their waves were not necessarily waves and wind, but their waves were torches. And this happened this weekend. Not years ago in the past. That is a story we all tell. This is happening now. And I think about it like we have this safety net that we all create for ourselves, right? And for some people, getting out of the boat is not easy because we create this thing. We create it by the friends that we have, by the place that we live, by the church that we go to and worship. We create these safety nets. And sometimes we have to step out. And sometimes the things that make us step out are other people. And how are we going to react to that? How are we going to stand up and be the peace? How are we going to say, this is not right? And I have a lot of friends, too, that are all over the U.S. They're preaching in lots of different churches this Sunday morning. And also, I feel like I'm on Facebook all the time. I'm not on Facebook all the time, but I was on it a lot this weekend because of all these stories that were coming out. And a lot of my friends were scared to preach the gospel on a day like today. Because preaching the gospel is preaching against hate. And preaching the gospel is preaching against injustice. And a lot of people, a lot of my friends are in the Midwest or in places perhaps where the people in the pews will say after their sermon, Pastor, that was you. Why are you preaching politics? Why are you preaching this politics? You're too political. You're too political. And I thought about it and I was like, you know what? I'm not afraid of that. Because this group of people here, we're like in the center of this. Because it's not politics, it's justice. It's not politics, it's the gospel. I will never understand white supremacy. I will never understand it. It's not something that is in my history. I was not raised this way, and I will never understand how a group of people can think that they are so much more than a group of other people. I won't be able to understand it. I can listen to people's stories and why they might think that way, but I will never understand it, and I will never support it, and it will always say that it is wrong. And now, it's interesting because I grew up in Ohio in kind of a rural area, and there are people in my high school that would probably have t-shirts with the Confederate flag on them, rural Ohio kids. And so I think about things like that when I heard the news that a man from Ohio plowed his car into protesters in Charlottesville this weekend and killed somebody and injuring many more. From Ohio. I'm from there. I might know him. I don't know. This could be my neighbor. Could be a family member. Who knows? Because we need to talk to each other more. We need to create these relationships of peace and justice with one another, because all we're going to start seeing is the other. All we're going to start seeing is, oh, you're a white dude. You must be a white supremacist. oh, you're a black woman. You must be a crazy, emotional wreck. Because that's what's happening. But if we look and keep our eyes on Jesus while we're out of the boat, because that's the first step, get out of the boat. We keep our eyes on peace, we keep our eyes on justice, we keep our eyes on faith, and we keep marching, and we keep standing up to what is right and what is the gospel. And that is what God is calling us to getting out of the boat. And sometimes we might doubt a little bit. And that happens. It happens to everybody. I would think some people this weekend, when they decided to go and have a peaceful anti-protest against a fairly not peaceful rally, I bet they were shaken a bit. I bet when that car was careening toward a group of people, that must have been rough. Those were waves. Those were the wind. But standing strong and reaching out to the faith that God has called us to is where we find our support. And we find it in each other. Now, Peter was the only one who jumped out of the boat this time. But what if we all were to jump out of the boat? What if we all jumped out of the boat together? And we can walk on the water of justice and peace and reconciliation. And we can be that. So that no longer it's, oh, you're a white dude. Or, oh, you're a black lady. Or, oh, you're a whatever. It's, oh, you're a human. And what is our common humanity? And how is God's love and mercy calling us into that living? So get out of the boat. Keep your eyes on God. And when the waves come, reach out your hands and say, save me. And there will be a whole group of people there out of the boat with you. Amen.